Hello. Good evening, everyone. For those of you in this hemisphere, and good morning, maybe, for those in the southern hemisphere. How y'all doing? Yeah. Hello, Garris. Yes, I'm glad you brought your baby oil. It's going to be that kind of a night, I can tell. Hey, Grace, how you doing? Well, let's just chat a bit while everybody's coming in. It was a rather different week in the P. Diddy trial. Some would say there wasn't enough excitement, but for me, actually, some of the actual nails in the coffin were were confirmed. In when I say the nails in the coffin, I mean the type of evidence that's needed to prove the charges, possibly evidence that's easy to understand for a jury. You see, as much as the attorneys and you know understand the law and what's needed to prove all of the charges against P. Diddy or anyone in a courtroom, I'm not sure that the jury always understands the actual elements of each offense and what it actually takes to prove it. After all, they're sitting there as 12 lay people with no real legal knowledge of the system, dealing with horrendous charges, and really they just have to take the evidence or not take the evidence. You see, the prosecution and or the defense can put on the best case in the world, and a jury can still sit there and just not pay attention to that evidence, not draw the connections that are necessary, throw stuff out just because, well, they didn't think it was relevant, or they don't understand it, or they just it didn't resonate with them. That's the reality of the jury system. And in a case like this, that is really contentious because it is so salacious, the details dripping with things that they don't want to hear. But the actual proving of the charges is an uphill climb and a rather technical process. And we're going to go over all of that this week because that's actually what happened this week. Hey, Mrs. C. How you doing, boo? Thank you for being over there in Kickshill. I appreciate you. Okay, I see people. Hey, Jen. Good to grope you. It's good to have everybody here. I'm going to give it just another minute before I pull up and start on the actual testimonies. But how was everybody's week? It feels a little strange to do this on a Saturday night. I'm usually having a conversation with Wrecker about getting my power back. But I do feel rather powerful and strong enough to go over this case, actually, after reading that whole book with Wrecker and understanding the internal process we all have to go through to not let others take advantage of us and to also be in a position to take advantage of opportunities when necessary and to actually put forward our goals and keep them in mind and stay on our path and not let others derail us. It was an adventure, one I enjoyed very much. You thinking today's Friday, Mrs. Cassandra? I was too when I got up. It took like somebody telling me like several times that it was Saturday because everyone I talked to, I kept thinking it was Friday. I did, yeah. Mrs. Cassandra says, I'm still imagining him nodding and looking at the jury. Oh, he got admonished like last week for that. They said they were going to throw him out of the courtroom if he kept it up because, like, this judge doesn't play around. Judge Subramanian, he just, like, he's his own man. He's like, you respect me or you're out of here. This is the process. Like, we have to talk about that. Well, actually, let's talk about that first. Yeah. Is that how you remembered because you weren't at work? Is Unfortunately I didn't have anything like that to tether me. Yeah. Your brains are mushy, Garris. Maybe there's too much baby oil. Put down the baby oil. Okay, so this week court opened up with a problem, with a serious problem for our jury. We definitely lost a juror member, the one who was a little inconsistent. I just saw it, Gary. That's not from the trial, you nut job. Like, stop. But yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Stop. I'm not going to get derailed, though. I'm going to stay on task here. I'm going to be good. So, we opened court on Monday after the week of testimony. A Friday, there had been a closed door discussion off the record. Nobody from the courtroom was able to hear it. In We don't know exactly what it was about. It was rumored to be about some jury members and things like that. Monday, the actual judge did, from another uh, incident that happened that we did hear about, because was in open court that they were talking about it. One of the jury members was dismissed because of a residency issue. By that I mean that he stated on his jury form that he lived in the area where he would be eligible to bid on the jury, but it came up that later he was talking to others that that's not where he lives. He lives out of state. He lives in New Jersey. That's where he's been for all of this time. He kind of misled the court in a way. Now, that's not, if he was moving back and forth, that's not really the issue. Well, the fact that he misled the court to stay on the jury became something the judge became concerned about. Why do you want to stay on the jury so bad that you would lie about where you live? That kind of proved a little bit of bias and maybe an agenda, and not that they're accusing them of anything, but rather than have that impropriety or the hint of impropriety, that juror was dismissed. Okay. Now, the defense became really upset about this. They even threw the race card in there, saying that they can't dismiss this juror because it would imbalance the members of the jury, and they didn't want this juror replaced by AKA another white juror, is what they said. They really threw the race card in there, even though it had nothing to do with it. That juror member could have been checkered or polka dotted for all the judge cared. Okay. The judge was quite upset by this accusation. Actually, he looked right at the defense, and he's like, looking at this multicultural courtroom that he has. He's got many different, let's just say, shades of anything from white to chartreuse sitting in the juror box. He himself is not a typical white judge, what you would think. I mean, Judge Subramanian, come on. They're just like, he's like, it's ridiculous. That's not what it is. Like, we have to go with the impropriety of it. It doesn't matter. Like I said, checkered, polka dotted, or striped. That's what you have to do. So you could tell that the judge was annoyed, and he just poo-pooed it, just like, yeah, sit down. Denied. I hear your motion. I think it's ridiculous. Now sit down and get ready for court. Judge Xavier, although he's very precise with the law and he's very cautious, he also just has a way of looking at you like he don't play. He gonna do what he gotta do. All right. So, all right. I'm glad everybody got their gropes in. All right. Let me bring up the presentation. Let's get this show on the road. We're going to be talking in depth about all the testimony for this week. Okay, so let's get cracking to it. Like I said, Judge Subramanian came right in and dismissed juror number 6. They put the alternate in there. definitely as one of the main jurors. Okay, already. Right now, we don't even know who's a real jury member for deliberation, and who's an alternate. They're all sitting there. So really, it's not like they had to substitute anybody in, because it's not deliberations. Well, there is an empty seat. So there is one less jury member in the pool, but they have plenty of alternates when it goes to deliberation, so they weren't really worried. Well, you could see Judge Subramanian just started things like really, really this way. This was the defense all huddled up about this, upset about this judge being this jury member being dismissed. They had argued fiercely for this jury member not to be dismissed. So when it was announced that the juror was dismissed by the judge, and that was the order, they all got together in a little huddle, and lo and behold, they decided to put up another motion. And this motion was that they or actually it was a request. It wasn't really a motion. It was, we want to know what you're going to tell the jury about this. How is this going to look to the jury? We need to make sure that this looks the right way to the jury, because the jury had not been brought in yet on Monday morning. And so, they were just all like, the judge is like, we're just going to tell them that a juror was dismissed. They don't need to know the reason. They don't need to know what you motioned about it. They don't need to know all of the controversy that you're bringing up around it. Like, we're just going to tell them, like we tell everybody else, that the juror was dismissed. That's all they need to know. The juror was dismissed for a residency issue, Mrs. Cassandra. It was, he had said that he was in the vicinity that qualified for jury in New York. Okay. And then during conversations with everybody, the jurors or whatever, and in front of court officials, it came to known that he was actually living in New Jersey. And when questioned about it, he is going back and forth and everything. But it appeared that he misstated his residency so he could stay on the jury. And that became one of those things that, well, it looks a little impropriety. Like, why do you want to stay on this jury so bad? What's the motivation? And so, because there was the hint of impropriety, they're not accusing the jury member of anything. But because it could come up and it could actually affect things later, it was better, after much consideration, because it isn't something that the judge just heard about and just decided. It took days. This was discovered last week. Okay, and he really deliberated on it. He heard both sides. But he did order that juror was dismissed. And so now the defense wants to know, like, well, how are you going to tell the jury about this? And the judge is like, again, with that look, as he looks at the jury, and I'll show you that look again, because this is the look. It's just like, for real? For real? And he just clearly states that, hey, we are definitely going to tell them what we tell everybody, that the juror was just dismissed. That's it. Even though everybody knew, like, in the courtroom, like, what was going on, and all the jury didn't. Okay, so there was that. So once we got that part all settled, okay, it was mostly the misleading statements that actually got the juror dismissed in regards to his residency. Okay. This is like the 6th week of trial. Nobody wants to lose a jury member. Okay. It's a lot of testimony that was given. They've got a lot of, day-to-day under their belt, But this particularly week, we faced a lot of scheduling disruptions and problems going forward. Well, that was the first thing that happened on Monday morning, was the juror dismissals. Like I said, he originally stated he lived in Bronx, where he was staying with a fiance. It wasn't his permanent residence. He was staying with somebody. But he did mention to court staff back and forth that he moved to New Jersey to live with a girlfriend. Yeah, don't judge. I mean, there's a lot I could say about that, but I'm just going to stay out of it. That's his personal business. Like, if he's going to be bouncing forth, back and forth between a fiance and a girlfriend, between Bronx, New York and New Jersey, like, hey, that's his personal business, but it don't fly for sitting on a jury. In the defense's objection, although a bit ridiculous, they're going to do what they're going to do. They want the best jury that they can for to look at Sean Combs as not guilty. Um, but arguing jury diversity was really like not something Judge Subramanian was willing to go in with. Okay. Um, and yeah, it's true. Like the jury's all there. There's definitely going to be a mix. But remember, they haven't gone into deliberations yet. So then we get to our first witness. Now, testimony for the beginning of this week, you all might be a little bit disappointed because it's going to be very technical. This paralegal, Ananya Sankar, was here for testimony basically to make sure all of these bank and credit card records showing, lots of stuff that was text messages between, charges that were made, text messages between Cassie Ventura and Sean Combs in several of the people that they hired for these under Cassie so-called freak-offs. When Sean Combs was with Cassie Ventura, they called them freak-offs, but they are the same type of event. They are the same type of scheduling, all the same things going on as in the other testimony of Mia and Jane. Cassie Ventura being the primary focus from day one, with victim number one. All of the evidence was gone over in this paralegal, Miss Sankar. Her job was to verify where all of these text messages were coming from, what was related in them, and actually get them into evidence in a concise way. There were conversations between Cassie and Sean Combs in regards to booking of things, when things would happen. He used the name Sean Combs and booked things in even his own name, his other alias name of Frank Black, which other testimony in prior weeks has confirmed to be him in his arrangements with hotels and stuff like this. Now, what came to light in here is that a lot of these transactions in hotels were in different states, back and forth. People were coming from New Jersey to go to New York, or they're in Miami, they're in Los Angeles, there are flights booked, there's correspondence, and there's also, for the first time, documentation of Sean Combs and Cassie Ventura in the same text messages linking in officials from his business, namely Christina Korn, who is very prominent in all his business dealings. Okay. And her being in these conversations or hearing from Cassie Ventura that she needs to contact, in abbreviations, KK, about something here and there. Sean Combs directing Cassie to contact KK for certain things. Also, very many of the personal assistants in different times, like D-Rock and a couple of others, all related to the business, paid by the business, all being in these conversations and making arrangements. And the reason I'm stressing that is because of RICO, they have to prove that the business actually was tainted by the personal criminal efforts of Sean Combs. Let's be clear. It needs to be criminal. Now, we've heard testimony in the weeks before about him threatening and intimidation to like Kid Cudi, like that whole big thing. Him holding a gun on one of his personal assistants to make her attend and witness what was going on with Kid Cudi. Threats of violence. We've got documented proof already on the records of his blackmail attempts to Cassie Ventura's mother, Regina Ventura. The money going back and in and out of the account. They've all documented that, they've documented the text messages and the emails back and forth. They're doing a good job of proving some criminal enterprise. What they have to prove is that he was, for his own personal benefit, organizing this criminal enterprise. Okay, now there's plenty of criminal events going on here. Well, what I found so striking is if you think about all of the personal assistants' testimony, all of them said they didn't think they were doing anything wrong and that he wasn't a criminal. These people that are actually buying drugs for him, organizing hotel rooms for sex workers and the thing, had the impression that these were all just for his personal pleasure, and there wasn't really anything criminal about it. Well, apparently, when you've got great personality and tons of money, and you're paying your personal assistants anywhere from $65,000 to $100,000 a year, I guess you look great, because it really takes some cross-examination, some direct examination by the prosecutors in this case to dispel that image, to show that, well, that is breaking the law. Well, how is the jury going to perceive it? I mean, that's what I've been thinking about lately. I mean, if you're sitting on the jury and you regularly smoke marijuana or, complain about paying taxes, maybe you don't think what he's doing is that bad. Like, maybe you think, like, if I had that kind of money, sure, I would, do this and that every once in a while. But it's still against law. And I'm hoping that the jury will have a bit of common sense in regard, besides whatever personal habits people may have. Were laws broken here? Did Sean Combs have the notion that the laws didn't matter to him as long as he was getting to do what he wanted to do? I mean, that's the part, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, Charlie, welcome. I just started. I'm only on the first witness, dude. It's okay. All right. So, you know, but when it comes to actually the documentation of all of these, that's what I meant by, finalizing the proof of certain charges and putting the efforts there. For RICO, we need at least 2 overt criminal acts that were done inside the organization with the help of his business organizations, a criminal enterprise, that Sean must have created this network to do these deeds, these freak offs, these furries, to take advantage of these women for his own personal pleasure, okay, and used his business and organizing of a criminal enterprise to do it, to cover up for it, to push it forward, to protect his reputation, all of that. It gets to be difficult. There's 3 different charges here we have to prove. There's the RICO, which is what I'm talking about with the criminal element in the enterprise. And then there's the sex trafficking, which involves the 3 women, Cassie, Mia, and Jane, intently. And then there's the carrying on across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. That would involve all of the sex workers that they hired, and also the 3 women, Cassie, Mia, and Jane, transporting them from state to state to use prostitution and sex trafficking as a means to gratify himself, which they have proved hands down. But these text messages do show that there was communication, at least on this part. This paralegal, Ananya Sankar, was dealing mostly with the Cassie Ventura documentation, okay, and a little bit of Mia, okay. And so they put in all of these text messages and stuff into evidence during the cross-examination by the defense attorney. They're going over a lot of the text messages, and they would point out, well, Are these just part of a conversation? And of course they are. They're not whole conversations. So they would pull out something nice like Cassie saying, "Oh, baby, you treated me so good," or something nice that was said. And they do this repeatedly throughout the trial, of course. But during this documentation process, trying to get the paralegal to say that this all was cherry picked. But actually, she says, "I'm not here to say the content of what it is. I'm here to verify where it came from and that this is a true and accurate portion of a record from those phone call conversations. I don't add, edit, or delete any of it. It wasn't her job to put it in there or not." So the defense was actually barking up the wrong tree. She's not the one putting it all together. So, like, really, she can't say whether that was in context or out of context. Okay. But it would resonate with a jury, in my humble opinion, that they pointed that out. Because, as we all know, anyone can present anything in any light that they like by taking out a few sentences here and there. But what she was able to prove is that those sentences were not taken out of the middle of a conversation. If they started A to, like, say H, it wasn't like anywhere in between. They omitted certain lines. Anything that they were talking about was before or after the section that was put into evidence. Now, for me, that resonates strongly with there's not really a manipulation of the data. There's just, I want to focus on this particular point. But still, it'll be up to the jury what they do with that. The defense has tried hard to discredit a lot of the testimony, especially concerning the women, the victims, Cassie, Mia, and Jane. They go hard, and their line all through this is they were not held against their will. They were not coerced into anything. They all did it way freely. Like, Sean Combs' defense basically is, yeah, I might be a freak and this is what I like to do, but it's not illegal. I could do this. And you know what? Sex is not illegal, no matter how you have it, really. Well, in some states, certain kinds of sex might be. But in general, sex and what you do with your partners is not illegal. How you get them to do it, where you get them to do it, what arrangements you make ahead of time to do it, whether or not there can be actual legal consent. And let me take this time to explain the concept of legal consent. Legal consent, you could say yes. You could say yes. You could say yes, 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 till the cows come home. However, if you are altered mentally by a stressful situation, by coercion, by a more powerful authority where you feel threatened and intimidated, legal consent cannot exist. When I say legal consent, I mean, irregardless of you saying yes, you are saying yes under duress, which means it's a no. That the average common sense person would understand in that situation, they couldn't possibly give consent. If you are unconscious, if you are so inebriated that you cannot function to be reasonable or to protect your own best interest, no consent. If you're sleeping or unconscious, obviously no consent. Okay. If obviously you are under the age of legal consent, being able to give it, then no consent. Whether you say yes a million times or not, no legal consent exists. So the concept of legal consent here is a big issue in this trial because the defense wants you to say that these are full-grown women that could have walked out of the room at any damn time. The prosecution wants to tell you that these women could not walk out of the room at any time, that they were in an emotional quagmire of a relationship with Sean Combs, that he used his authority and with manipulation and pressure and actually their feelings for him to manipulate them, that he controlled them financially, that he controlled them physically, which has been proven over and over again with violence and threats, physical violence, threats of manipulation by showing the tapes of the freak-offs. Remember, everything that they did was recorded and then used against the women. So, it's a huge concept, but it's going to be up to the jury to actually get there and their actual perception of what legal consent is. This is I've been thinking about over the last 2 weeks is jury perception, because it could go either way. Every bit of evidence they put in, the jury can just look at it or not. They could think it's very valuable or not. Okay. Although I'm trying to look at it precisely as to what the prosecution is trying to do and what checkpoints they hit to prove their case, I look at it totally different than every member on that jury. I'm on the outside here with more information than they have. And they could just say, she's lying, and totally disregard everything. Now, when it comes to Cassie Ventura, she is the witness that is the most prominent to be sympathetic. She showed up 8 months pregnant, tearful, shamed, saying, yeah, I did all of that. And I feel shame and regret. And this is why I did it. I didn't feel I could leave. I felt controlled. I felt this. I felt that. She was very persuasive that way. But also recently, you may have heard a video or audio recording, rather, of her threatening to kill somebody over release of one of these tapes. Of that sweet little voice going, I've never killed anyone, but I will kill you. Ironic, right? Well, it depends on what weight the jury gives that. The prosecution said, and this was not something that happened this week. It got released to the public this week, so we all know about it. But it was actually played weeks ago when Cassie was actually, doing her testimony. We're 6 weeks in. This is like old. Well, this is the defense trying to buster up their case a bit here, trying to say that Cassie was a willing person and she enjoyed every minute of it. This was all her idea. She's pretty gangster herself. This was all for her. Like, she wanted all of this. Okay. But actually, the prosecution is portraying it as, yeah, that's her fighting to keep those videos out of light. That's somebody that she trusted. It was a person, he was a promoter for a club or something. He said he saw one of these videos and she was telling him, well, show it to me. What are you talking about? She wanted to know what it was. She wanted to know if it came from Sean, if he had leaked it, if somebody in his orbit was actually leaking it, if she was in any danger. If she's staying there against her will, according to her, financially being oppressed, having to stay there so they don't get released. And if those videos are already out there, then why is she getting beat regularly? Why is she putting up with this? So the prosecution says, of course she was talking like that. She was desperate. But I will say it was very weird to hear that sweet voice. She's young. She has a sweet voice, trying to talk all gangster like that. She basically said she would kill him, but it wouldn't be her. She would actually have somebody do it. And she actually said, and if I don't, he will. And I wondered, was that he, P. Diddy? Was that who she was referring to? Because that's what the defense is trying to say. That she's been in coercion with P. Diddy all along for these freak-offs. It's a personal thing of consent. It's just how they did things, and it's not illegal. So that was just one of the things that came out into the public. But anyway, when they were done, back on track with our witness, when they were done with Miss Sankar, who was really just there to document all of this video, audio, and text messaging evidence in regards to Cassie Ventura's relationship with Sean Combs and the stuff that's been put into evidence, but also to now finally put together some of the ties to the business with the entrance of Christina Korn in these text messages and in this correspondence back and forth, which was very important. Okay. You can see they've got Christina Korn and Cassie talking about personal events between her and Blake, most likely about the beating that happened, that we saw the video tape from CNN released, okay, in 2016, to where Sean said that, any other woman would be pleased with what I'm doing for her. You talk back, you deserve what you get, blah, stuff like this. He's trying to justify what happened. She's saying it shouldn't happen anymore. there's an event, and he's actually saying you should go talk to KK because she'll tell you how you act. You should talk to your friends because they will tell you how you act. And so she actually does contact KK to say, and she says, Sean says I was being an asshole. I need to talk to you. Okay, so what that implies in these actual text messages is that KK, Christina Corin, knows how Sean is treating these women, knows about this event at the hotel and another event where something else happened, and that she's actually with full knowledge of all of this. That's a problem. How she's handling it. She's not been subpoenaed to testify in this case. She's not listed as a co-defendant in this case either. This has always made me very curious. She knows everything that goes on the business end and on Sean's personal end, so to speak. At least that's what these text messages are inferring. Why isn't she here in this case? Like, what's going on? Makes me very curious. Anyway, once we finished with that first witness of the week, before the day ends, Judge Subramanian has a hissy fit. Oh, yeah. He calls the defense. You'll see there standing Marc Agnifilo and Maurene Comey, who's the chief prosecutor in this case, standing there in front of the judge, getting berated. Because apparently there was an article that was released, and I don't know where, but it was about, it gave out information that Judge Subramanian is accusing the defense and the prosecution's teams of leaking confidential information from that private hearing that they had on Friday. And he's annoyed. And he's talking about criminal sanctions for releasing it. He's talking about admonishments. He's pissed. He's talking about perhaps seizing all of their cell phones. I kid you not. He's that serious about it. And he says it can't happen again. That the only people that knew what happened are the ones he's looking at right now. And that would be, and he goes, and even if you say you didn't do it, someone on your team or related to your team did. And we're going to find out who it is. And it's your job to find out who it is because you are responsible. It's your team. Oh, yeah. He laid it. He said, nope, no leeway. He was pissed. It had to do with one of the witnesses that have privacy concerns. Either Mia, who's already been outed, and or Jane. Jane has is testifying under a pseudonym, and there are privacy issues there. And there was some kind of violation between that, or it's about the jury again, because there were other jury members that there were some questions about. The defense wanted to have one of them removed, and that was just straight out denied by Judge Subramanian. They did a formal motion under seal, and that could be what Friday's, thing was about. But it came out into the public through this article, and the judge wasn't having it. He was just absolutely, totally pissed off about it. He's not going to have any of this leaking stuff going on in his court. And he wanted to charge somebody for it. Well, he's been pushed upon. Let me just check for some questions. I hear you there, Miffy. Yep. Pretty much, that's where it's kind of leaning towards Mippet, but I'll get more into that. We're going to do a summation at the end of each charge, but yeah. It can jeopardize the trial, Mrs. Cassandra. It is serious. Could it lead to a mistrial? I'm hoping not. I don't think it will because you didn't do the sanctions and they don't know who did it yet. But if they do find out it was somebody prominent in either team, I don't know. I don't think the judge, in all honesty, I don't think the judge would throw the whole case out for something like that. If it involved a juror doing it, they would have to. They would. For jury misconduct, like if they gave an interview or something like that, or started leaking, yeah, they would have to. But remember, the jury didn't know about that meeting, so it couldn't have been them. So, all right, let's go. We got more witnesses. All right, so the next witness that comes up is Agent DeLeassa Penland. And again, this is going to be a lot of documentation of videos and testimony to just document a lot of let me just get back to the day. Where was it? Credit card receipts, that were done showing Combs had billed over $944,000 in hotel stays and airfare and escort expenses through the corporate accounts of his business. Now, this is huge. Okay, this is where the tying in of the organized enterprise, the illegal organized enterprise. Okay, Bad Boy Entertainment was paying for the freak-offs. Bad Boy Entertainment was paying for the escorts. Bad Boy Entertainment was paying the expenses of Cassie, Mia, and Jane. Bad Boy Entertainment was paying for the baby oil. Let's put it that way. So they've linked his private enterprises with his personal life. And so as long as he keeps saying, oh, this is just personal, it's just what I do, well, you just made it criminal when you've got your business paying for it all. Yeah, you did. That's criminal, Sorry, it is. They're showing the link there that there was an enterprise that he created to be able to do all of this illegal. Okay. It does show racketeering conspiracy. It's suggesting the misuse of corporate funds to support illicit sex trafficking events. Okay, but that hinges on the fact of whether they think that Cassie, the jury, thinks that Cassie, Mia, and Jane were sex trafficked. It's got to hinge on the believability of the coercion, the believability about him using them. And here's kind of what I have to say a little bit about that. Even if they were doing it to please Sean Combs, which each of the women had said that they had to keep him happy, it's still illegal. It's still sex trafficking. If you take advantage of a person that way, you bring in prostitutes to have these little mini parties while you sit in a chair and you watch before you engage hours later. And here's the thing, we're not talking about a normal pornographic video of an hour or two. These women have testified that these events could go on for 18, 24, 36 hours, drug and alcohol infused. That's not normal. And I use that word like casually. I'm not judging anybody's personal sexual preferences. But if you got to drug somebody to stay in a room with you for 36 hours, how is that not under the influence or coercion? How does that stand up to legal consent in any common sense of the word? Come on. How does that stand up to legal consent? To me, it just doesn't. It just doesn't, It has not come up in the record yet, and I want to know what the safe word was, and I'm sure there was. Actually, let me address that, Mippy. That's actually a good question, because Cassie Ventura's testimony actually said she wasn't allowed to say no. There was actually testimony of her, and also I think it was that escort that was called the Punisher. He clearly said that Cassie and he didn't want to go forward for another round. and that Pity ordered them to. And that was big testimony. So maybe there is no safe word, which makes it coercion, which makes Diddy in control, the manipulator, the organizer, the one that everybody's afraid of. Okay. Because the Punisher said that he heard Cassie say she didn't want to anymore. He really didn't want to because she didn't want to, and he didn't want to force himself on anybody. And yet they still were coerced into doing it anyway. That P. Diddy had a conversation with Cassie, and then all of a sudden they were on again. That sounds to me like no safe word. That sounds to me like that's evidence of it not really being a willing participation, but I remember that clearly from testimony, I think in week 1, when she was on the stand. Allegedly, baby oil would be it. Mrs. Cassandra, you're not far off. You're really not. All right. So besides showing all of these explicit bills and everything like that, we also we get to the point when this particular Homeland Security agent is on the stand. They also are going over all of these emails about meetings and everything. They're documenting all of the expenses for the hotels, that they are in multiple states. And this is important because the third charge about the prostitution, sex trafficking across state lines, because it was Los Angeles, because it was Miami, because it was multiple different hotels all over the place, including New York and everywhere, just about everywhere that they went, it becomes the proof of the third charge. Okay. And there's all of this documentation of these messages back and forth. In several of them, the bookings were done by Frank, in Frank Black's name, or by Frank Black himself, where he's telling them where to book or what to do. And that is Sean Combs. Okay. Sean dealing directly with Cassie, telling her where, and her also saying who they're going to join with and this and that. Okay. A lot of that back and forth. Now, most of these text messages, and videos are not seen by everybody in the galley. They are only seen by the participants, the witness, the judge, the defense, the prosecution, and the jury. They have these monitors that it all comes up, and a lot of it isn't displayed largely. Very, very little of the evidence gets displayed largely when it comes to the Cassie Ventura information is all open most of the time, but except for the videos and the audio tapes. Okay. But the text messages between Jane and everybody, they're all like redacted. Like they can't be shown publicly, which is why they use these monitors. But in this particular case, they were going over almost all of the text messages and everything of Cassie Ventura. And when the defense went up there, Tina Gregarious, I'm just mangling her name, and I do apologize, Teny, that I got that wrong. Teny. Anyway, she's a fantastic lawyer for the defense. And when she got up there, she's talking about particular text messages that are missing. But she does hone in on one that is there, and really wants to focus again on text messages from Cassie Ventura that would kind of allude to her wanting to participate, which the prosecution all along said that's how it looks. Cassie Ventura testified, yes, there were plenty of times where I'm appeasing him and I am acting the part and I'm doing, but I didn't want to. I felt I had to. There's a difference between wanting to and having to. And that's her testimony in a nutshell. That, yeah, it looks like I wanted to, but I didn't want to. I had to. Finance my career. I'm being threatened with the videos. I'm being beat. This is her testimony in a nutshell. There's a difference between wanting to and having to. Okay. I know. So Teny puts up this one actual text that says, I bought the best sexy outfit for later in the freak off in shoes. because he did like them to have. We saw in the raid all the sexy shoes and the outfits. He had closets of them for the freak offs that he put his women in. And notice he kept all the clothing and all. And I want to actually point that out, because to me, that's an element of control in how this is with him, that this is going to continue, because the woman that goes into them is just the woman that goes into them. It's the outfits and the shoes. He keeps all the stuff. He has all the preparation. They're just playing a part in this fantasy, in this control, in this need of Sean Combs. Because the same thing happened A to Z, point by point, between Cassie, Mia, and Jane. They all testify to the same thing, how the relationship started, being coerced into the freak offs, never having done anything like that before, having it be almost mandatory to the relationship, had them wanting to spend one-on-one time with him as their girlfriend, as their chosen, and then being pulled into this. All three stories the same. Mia being a little different because she was a personal assistant. She actually felt like she had to have relationships with him for the job or whatever. She was afraid to push back. There was no one to go to. Who do you go to? Well, anyway, again, trying to take away the image that they were forced into these. The defense is pulling out text messages to say, well, doesn't that look like they wanted to do this? Doesn't that look like they enjoyed this too? And, that does not mean that it's legal. What really gets me is that Sean gets to go over all of this. He's looking at it all at all times. And I really feel, I'm glad that it was actually agents putting all of this in and not actually the victims again having to watch him kind of enjoying all of these messages. Yeah. I wonder if he's reliving it. I mean, that's just me. I don't know. I'm not in the courtroom. I can't see him. But if you think somebody's a freak about all these stuff and this is their thing, this is their control and everything, like, boy, are we making him really happy by playing it all out in the courtroom so he can see it all again and again and again. And just, yeah. Guess that's why he's in such a good mood lately, huh? While he's on trial for possibly going to go to jail for the rest of his life. I mean, he's in there now. He might never ever get out, So the jury is going to now start, and they're watching three major. On this day, they only watched one video, but throughout the rest of the week, they watched quite a few hours of the actual videos of freak offs. These all pertain to Cassie with multiple people, multiple of the escorts that they already put on file. And before that, they had only seen stills. But now they've got the music, the live action noise, and the visual. And they're watching it on telescreens with headphones. Only the defense, the prosecution, the judge, the witness who's verifying the video, and the actual juror members. Now, reports from the courtroom, and these are from reporters or people from like Law and Crime, Elizabeth Milner, who's doing it. There's a P. Diddy Updates, who's also, these are people who are in the courtroom documenting the day-to-day what's happening. Some of them documenting the actual testimonies, and I have some links for you of an account that's on X that is doing a lot of the documentation there. And I've made a thread app for you, so you don't need X to actually read it, but they deserve some credit for all of their work in trying to document the testimonies for those of us who cannot see into the courtroom of what's going on. But know that they are their personal view of what is going on. They're doing their best to document it. It can't be considered a transcript or anything like that, but it is a pretty good snapshot of what's transpiring in the courtroom on a day-to-day basis, And their testimony is that many of the jurors looked uncomfortable. They were listening. They did do their due diligence and paid attention. Nobody took their headphones off to the end. But one in particular juror took it off pretty quickly at the end. Several of the women on the juror made audible sounds of disgust or looked down in a way or shook their heads. People looked uncomfortable. There was some signs of discomfort. Some paying attention. Sean Combs is watching this too, and that's the part that really gets me. Re-victimizing the victim here. I can imagine. I'm glad that Cassie Ventura was not in the courtroom, because Sean Combs put his hand up so the jury could not see his face. Well, he was staring intently in there, and he was trying not to react. But just the fact that he didn't want the jury to see his face said everything to me. Yeah, that was enough for me right there. Well, okay. So, before I get to that one, let's just say we then this was all Monday and Tuesday. Okay. And then we did not finish with our witness, Miss Penland. We were going to bring in Brandon Paul, okay, for the next day on Wednesday. But on the way to court, a jury member got vertigo and called in sick, and court was canceled. Now, just for jury testimony, they did do some, busy work with the attorneys and all, doing some evidence argument back and forth with the judge and this, that, and the other thing. They stayed there. They had also stayed there on Monday for a couple of hours to go over stuff. And then on Tuesday, when they were finishing up, they were going to do the rest of the cross-examination of Penland. I'm not sure if they finished that up Tuesday or if they started again on Friday, because not only did we not have actual testimony on Wednesday because of the juror being out. Also on Thursday, it was June 19th, so courts were closed. That's a federal holiday here in the United States. So we start on Friday. They finish up, if they finished it up with Penland. But they also had said to the judge that they only have the two more witnesses, the prosecution. So they could possibly finish on Friday, at the latest Monday, with their testimony. The judge was pleased to hear that the prosecution was wrapping up, and he asked the defense, what do you plan on bringing forward? And they gave a very tentative 2 to 5 days, because they're not sure yet. Like, they haven't firmed it up what they're doing yet. But it could be 2 days, it could be 5 days. But what that means for you and I is that closing arguments could be as early as next Friday. Wouldn't that be something? It could go to the jury. Yeah? Yes. And that's pretty quick. I mean, for the defense, because, it's been 6 weeks here for the prosecution. Not exactly a quick trial. And that could actually be a determinant for the jury. They've got a lot to remember. They've been diligently taking notes and doing what they can. But 6 weeks is a lot of testimony, a lot of it technical too, a lot of it distasteful. There's a lot of nuance. Okay. So we'll see how this jury actually plays out. I have some trepidation. I have to be honest, So Wednesday, that juror was ill. Thursday, there was the federal holiday, and now we get to Friday. Okay, and when we get to Friday was a big lead up. Everybody was, I don't know if you guys caught the socials, but everybody's talking Friday about how Brandon Paul is going to be testifying. And if you'll remember Brandon Paul, let me just give you a little back context to Brandon Paul. Brandon Paul only worked for P. Diddy for about 18 months. And the reason it was only 18 months is very important, because back when the raids happened in March of 2024, okay, if you all will recall a video that was circulating, at the time of the raids of Sean Combs pacing outside the Miami airport on the sidewalk, back and forth, you know, that there was a report that everyone on the private jet that Sean Combs had hired to take his family on vacation was pulled into customs. Everybody except for Sean Combs, that is. And then everybody was released from customs. And the only one that was taken out of the building, the airport, and put into a police car was none other than his personal assistant, bingo, Brandon Paul, who was alleged to be a drug mule for Sean Combs. He was caught with cocaine. He was allegedly transporting weapons, this, that, and the other thing. Listen, lots of speculation here and that. But anyway, Brandon Paul caught some drug charges. Brandon Paul said those drugs were his. And he caught a drug charge. He was covering for P. Diddy. Now, that came up in his testimony. He clearly had to state under oath that they were not his drugs. He bought those drugs for Sean Combs, and he bought drugs for Sean Combs regularly during the employment from, I think, 22 until 24, just 18 months that he had with Sean Combs, that he was paid over $100K a year, that his hours of work were 80 to 100 hours a week, that he was his personal assistant, and his job was to keep him happy. Okay. Now, Brandon Paul was subpoenaed here against his will, absolutely. But he also has an immunity deal because his drug charges were dropped for his testimony. Now, Mr. Paul is walking a fine line here because he really has no beef with P. Diddy over any of this. He clearly stated that he thought it was a small part of his job to do the drugs and everything. He said it was like 1%, although the emails and testimony and stuff and conversations that he had with KK, Christina Cormack, Sean Combs, Cassie Ventura, and others, including Jane, because remember, this is during Jane's history with Sean Combs. This is when Jane is active in not what she changes the name of freak-offs to King's Nights or Hotel Nights. That's something Christina Corman starts mentioning in text messages. Seems like everybody knows about this, and it seems to be a day-to-day thing that happens. But here is Brandon Paul saying, it's only 1% of my job. And yet he's booking hotels, and he's responsible for cleaning the hotels, preparing hotels beforehand, and actually cleaning them up afterhand. And some of these hotels are in really, really bad shape, and actually damages have to be paid. The testimony that happened beforehand of all the damage bills from hotels that came in through the Homeland Security agent, okay, thousands and thousands of dollars for stuff that is permanently stained with body fluids and body oil, rugs, carpeting and rugs, furniture, bedding. It all has to be replaced because it is permanently gunked up, so to speak. You know, I know you don't want to be on that cleanup crew, do you, Mrs. C? Not at all. At all. But so his testimony was really bad because it also proved who was paying the bills, that he actually got all of the money reimbursed through Bad Boy Entertainment. He would send in invoicing of all the personal expenses, whatever it is he had to buy for Sean Combs, and that everything was paid through Bad Boy Enterprises, including drug reimbursements. Yeah, that's a big one. Because whether or not he says it was for personal use or this or that, or whether Brandon Paul has an issue, whether he does or doesn't with how much drugs Sean Combs does, it was still illegal. I mean, they went through all this stuff about the big list of drugs, ecstasy, ketamine, you know, different types of specialty drugs, party drugs, you know, lots of cocaine. Okay. And oh, by the way, P. Diddy keeps the Cialis in his nightstand. He has to take this medication, improve his function, 18, 24, 36-hour free course. Yeah, I guess you would need something. But, you know, there was talk back and forth about how things had to be. There was even a photograph that he took to send to one of the other people that was setting up the room, that the baby oil and the Astroglide had to be in certain condition and displayed in a certain way for everybody to make it copacetic. I kid you not. Okay. During his testimony, a lot of other evidence came in afterwards, that they were gonna bring forward. But Brandon Paul's testimony was short. Okay. It wasn't as long. They did go to some details on who paid what, but one of the other things that came to light was that he was fired regularly. One time he was fired, and it was a big story that he was fired over a Lululemon bag that he didn't have, and that Christina Corman, again proving that Bad Boy Entertainment and the business associates are all involved in all of this. When Brandon Paul gets fired, he's talking to KK about it, and Sean Combs doesn't mention it. She just tells him to chill out and come back later, and it'll all smooth over. And he does. But when he's asked if there was a process, like if you were fired so often over little stuff like this, wasn't there an HR process or anything that you could go through? And he's like, no, on my job, I can only talk to Sean Combs or KK, Christina Corman, proving that he was the head of an illegal enterprise, proving that he eliminated the opportunity for anybody to be able to do anything else about anything else, that there was actual maneuvering made in an illegal enterprise for him to be in control of it, organize it, manipulate it, and use it to protect himself and to obtain his personal desires. All of these illegal activities for his own personal desires, that he was using that organization as the weight behind getting it all done. And I don't think Brandon Paul realizes that that's what his testimony did, because he actually said he didn't think that anything was really that bad. He actually testified that he thought Jane was enjoying what she did, and she never complained about it to him. The defense went up there and said, how was your experience? And he said his experience with P. Diddy was overall good, that he didn't really have an issue. He thought that it was only like a small part of his job. And he also thought that everything that was done, the drugs, the ordering of prostitutes, the hotels, was only personal. It was how he let off steam. It was his escapism, because he was such a hard worker and an entertainer, general, diligent person. When asked if he had an issue with anything, if he would work with someone that he thought was doing criminal things, he said absolutely not. When asked if he was a drug runner or a drug mule, he said absolutely not. And I'm like, how can you say that when there's multiple text messages of you buying drugs for the man? But he's not a drug mule. I guess his idea of a drug mule is if you are dealing in thousands of pounds of cocaine and, putting your life at risk with guns with the cartel or something. But a drug mule is just somebody who buys drugs or transports drugs for another person. And quantity is not an issue. It just, you do that, Brandon Paul. I don't know why you're saying you're not a drug mule. Well, I guess he's just got a different notion of it. What we see in the movies and everything, But the law, the legal aspect of it, doesn't make any difference between a half ounce and 27 pounds. Sorry, you're a drug mule. All right. Anyway, part of his job, right? I mean, they didn't advertise the job as drug mule. They advertised it as personal assistant. And all in all, he was very happy with it. And he said he went out of his way to make sure he kept Sean happy, because he was pleased with this opportunity and he wanted to impress him. This was a young man out of college with basketball and everything behind him. Very smart, very popular in college and all. He's young now, you know, and he probably thought it was the coolest job he ever had, to be honest. It's probably, was really sad. But that job ended the day he got arrested. Yeah. He doesn't have the job anymore. But in redirect, when the prosecutor got up and asked him, how would you explain your relationship with Sean and how you feel about Sean Combs now? And he said, like many other, almost every single personal assistant, he said it's complicated. Now, that resonated with me, and I'll tell you why. And I want to know what you guys think about it. I'm thinking if you hear that as the jury repeatedly, I think that you realize that all of these people, they like the job, they like the money. They're seeing things that they're not really cool with, but they don't want to make a big deal about it because, maybe it's not. That Sean Combs is a very personal person of influence. And he's charming and he can really smooth you, but he's also threatening. And you don't want to go against him because it's not going to end up good for you, you know? So that little word, it's complicated, that tells me that they all knew there'd be consequences if they didn't do what Sean Combs wanted. That, just those words, it's complicated. The ones that protect you from actually saying what you really think. Yeah, you're appreciating the job, but yeah, you don't exactly want to get your legs broke, do you? That's what it means to me. Maybe I'm making too much of it, but I don't know. Will the jury think so? Will the jury see that every single person who testified, although they couldn't say they actually thought everything that he did was wrong, they weren't willing to say he was the best guy ever either. They weren't willing to say it was a great, I never saw a problem. They weren't willing to say anything because it would be a lie. Because truth is, it is complicated. It's a world none of them really live in. They're just visiting. The world of Sean Combs is full of power and money like I don't know what. Something they all dream of. They just want to be a part of, but they're not really. Maybe they didn't like some of the stuff they saw, but they sure didn't think it was big enough to do anything about. Not one of them ever thought to intervene in anything. Not one of them had any problem with buying drugs for him, you know, transporting weapons. The women were meant to carry weapons for him. This is crazy kinds of stuff that they're actually normalizing because of the situation. Anyway, we had one more witness for the week, and that is Homeland Security agent Joseph Cerciello, and they are not finished with him by any means. He's got quite a bit more testimony, and then he's going to do the same thing that the other two witnesses, the paralegal Miss Sankar in Homeland Security agent Penland, did for Cassie Ventura's videos, in text messages and emails and audios. He's going to put that all into perspective in regards to Jane. He's going to go over all of the Jane information, all of the text messages coming in for him. His name is Joseph Cerciello. He introduced all these charts based on all of Homeland Security's investigations documenting about 45 different Kings or freak-off encounters between Combs and Jane between 21 and 24, and verifying all of the travel logs and all of the communications that went on between them. What stood out in his testimony that there were bills at hotels in December, in January, December 2021, January 2023, and later, that included damages for the furniture and the body fluids, like I said, These are all the estimated hotel bills are usually, and they're only for like 2 nights, and they're like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a piece, back and forth. And then they would have additional cleaning, like they said in the one hotel where there was always an extra cleaning charge whenever Frank Black actually made arrangements, and they also read into evidence lots of text messages between Combs, Cassie, and Ventura, dealing with the physical and emotional abuse. The investigation had been long going. They put all of this in, but having the actual agent involved in the case documenting where this actual evidence is coming from, the text messages that they're actually putting in, the videos that they're actually putting in, they have to do that for verification, and it also to allow the defense for cross-examination of how it was obtained, and etc. Mr. Cerciello, Homeland Security Agent Cerciello, will be the last witness for the case, but they're not done. He's going to continue on Monday, and the defense hasn't had at him yet. So what we're looking at right now is just partially what's been putting in there as far as the hotel bills and all of this. Again, documenting where they were paid from. And I'll say it again, Bad Boy Entertainment paying the hotel bills is an issue. It's a strong point of documentation for the RICO charges. It is. But it all hinges on whether or not they believe that the women were there coerced and that the sex trafficking stands up. Because if the sex trafficking doesn't exist, then paying for the hotel doesn't really mean anything, does it? You see how everything kind of connects and snowballs together, and it all hinges on whether the jury looks at Cassie, Mia, and Jane as victims. If they look at them as victims, sex trafficking is proved. RICO is proved. If they look at them as willing participants, it gets really messy. Some of it's proved, some of it isn't. They have to look at them as willingly. Could it be a mix of both? Could they think that they willingly participated to stay in the relationship with Sean Combs and reap the benefits of like all of their bills being paid, being kept, women, whatever? But then you add in the drugs and the term of legal consent. Will the jury go that far and say, well, maybe they kind of willingly want to be there and they're willing participants, but are they kept there under control and coercion with drugs, manipulation, and physical violence? I think they can easily prove that. And hopefully, a jury that wants to put a lot of thought into it, hopefully they'll get there. But it's a lot of evidence to dig through. It's a lot of boring stuff to dig through as far as the text messages back and forth, who said what, where, and when. Are they actually going to get at the connection of the CEO of Bad Boy Entertainment, coming in and documenting that, Regina Ventura did pay blackmail to Sean Combs. He blackmailed her to keep videos from becoming public, Are they going to remember that Capricorn Clark hid a gun to her head on the way to Kid Cudi's because Sean Combs wanted some confrontation and wanted a witness to the conversation? Are they going to remember that gun to her head? Are they going to remember that Brandon Paul was arrested and took the blame for Sean Combs? Why? Why would he automatically go and get cocaine charges on him to protect Sean Combs? Does not all of that really testify to the criminal aspect of Sean Combs' personality? That he's willing to cross the lines, hurt whoever he wants, break whatever law he wants to get what he wants at any given moment? To me, that really speaks loudly. But will it to a jury? Will it to the jury? And I ask you guys here in the chat, and those of you listening later, would it do it for you? Does it speak loudly of the criminal intent, of the actual criminal enterprise that he has created? Is this music mogul, this entertainment genius, so to speak? He has built an empire successfully, but did he do it through criminal activity and intent? Is he really just the best dressed thug? You guys seem to absolutely. Hey, Beck, how you doing? I think so. And yeah, okay, well, see, like I'm thinking. So to me, it looks like, and we're going to talk about the AI in a second, it looks to me like they have actually really pretty much put a good case forward, would you say, the prosecution? But now let's refer to the magic machine, the AI, which I routinely ask, and I tell it, and this is the sentence I put in: with all of the testimony that you're aware of in the actual charges in the indictment on this case, what is the percentage of a guilty verdict, and what particular testimonies hit the mark here and there? And I do that to challenge myself, because I want to see if the AI comes up with what I come up with, because I do all of my research on my own. And as I'm going through the testimony, as you see, I'm talking to you about it just off the cuff. I am still actually thinking about, like, how does this affect the charges? Like, there's 3 charges here, and what are they trying to prove? And does it hit the mark? And I take it a little farther and go, will the jury actually understand that? You know, will the jury actually get that? You know? All right. So let's see. And I used 2 different AIs to get here. All right. Okay. Goodbye, Mr. Cerciello. We will see you again next week. Let me just pull up just me, because for this, I don't have any slides for the AI. Okay. Let's just see. All right. The first AI, when I asked about this, the first AI told me that in looking at the racketeering conspiracy, the RICO charge, okay, what supports the high probability of 80% chance of a guilty verdict? This AI that I'm using, which is one through I'll just name it, it's ChatGPT. They told me that based on all of the testimony from day one, there is an 80% chance of a guilty verdict based on what they're gathering information. And they look at, well, court documents that I do put in there, and also all of the videos that everybody's doing, talking about it everywhere, every scrap of information they can get. And what they're saying is, what supports the high probability is the witnesses' pattern of testimony. Mia, Jane, and Cassie, via their evidence, describing repeated coercive sex parties, threats, and surveillance, consistent with a coordinated criminal enterprise. In other words, they're all explaining the same experience on and on. And when they say coordinated criminal enterprise, they're meaning this paid all by the enterprise that Sean Combs has put into effect through Bad Boy Entertainment. They also said that Brandon Paul's testimony, describing codified internal structure, Wild King nights, getting fired over a bag, not having anybody to go to, only being able to talk to Sean Combs or KK, Christina Corman, drug logistics, sexual event prep, clean up things, testimony on a daily basis. And he's supposed to be a personal assistant hired by Bad Boy Entertainment to take care of Sean Combs. And yet that's what he needs to do every day. Also, the testimony of Jonathan Perez, who organized parties and managed logistics for escorts and performer travel constantly. This was the duties of multiple personal assistants. Okay. The financial evidence. When Agent DeLeassa Penland testified that the corporate accounts paid for airfare, hotels, and escorts upwards of $944,000, suggesting enterprise level funding and intent. Also, the last testimony of Joseph Cerciello, just to date, when they introduced the logs of 45 different events that happened, and if they are considered criminal and part of this enterprise, they're corroborated by bank statements and hotel records with matching communications of all parties involved, which included more than the women, included Sean Combs directly, and also Christina Cormack, and many of the public, of his personal assistants. Many of them were also in there. And other people, security guards, bodyguards, okay, other levels of management are in these text messages, all related to these freak-offs. This proves that Freakoffs was part of the organization of the enterprise with Bad Boy Entertainment. Common knowledge, not just some behind-the-scenes thing that P. Diddy liked to do when he was off duty. He did it on duty, off duty, all the time. 24/7, 7 days a week, it could have happened. It wasn't just a free time activity. It wasn't just escapism. It wasn't just his reward for a job well done. It was a lifestyle. It was an organized, consistent event. It was the way things were. That's what they're saying. Anyway, other things that prove it are bribery and cover-up efforts, like Eddie Garcia testifying that he received $100,000 to bury a hotel video, which showed Cassie being beat. Mia testifying she was offered hush money in 2023 after Cassie Ventura's civil lawsuit dropped. Test messages read by Ms. Sankar this week that showed strategic messaging campaigns after lawsuits were filed. Yep, back and forth communications, talking about all the lawsuits that were going on and what they're going to do about it. And here's the kicker on that. People from Bad Boy Entertainment were in those conversations. Security guards, management, Christina Cormack. This is how you prove RICO. Sean Combs manipulating and controlling all the people who work for him to do his bidding, to protect his reputation, to keep what he wants to do above board somehow, but still be able to do it, whether breaking the law or not, and they're to protect his reputation and to protect him at all costs. And he used every part of his industry to do it. That's what they're trying to prove here. And then let's not forget the kicker. The physical evidence proves RICO. 500 bottles of Astroglide and 200 bottles of baby oil seized during the raid, suggesting scale and intent, all bought and paid for by Bad Boy Entertainments. Weapons and ammo also add an element of criminality, especially when you actually filed off all the serial numbers on those weapons. If that doesn't prove it, I don't know what does. But that also puts to the element of intimidation and control. Not only just criminal intent and willing to violate the laws, but actually illegal possession. Now, the weak points of the RICO case are that the defense has argued that these actions, while extensive, expensive, and inappropriate, they don't actually constitute a criminal enterprise under RICO standards because everybody was a willing participant. Are you a willing participant if you're paid? Are you a willing participant if it's your job? Is there a little bit of pressure there for you to do things that you may not normally do? I don't know. Just a question. But anyway, some of the timeline inconsistencies were highlighted, especially during Cassie Ventura's friend, Miss Bogelin, when they couldn't get the actual presence, which apartment it was actually in, what state they were in when it happened. And I'm talking about the testimony where he hung the woman over a balcony, threatening to kill her if she caused any trouble, because she was sticking up for Cassie. And also, Jane's recollections are not often very precise, and she often, although testifying to something very distasteful, would then counter it with the fact that she still loves him and that she wanted to please him and that some things she did willingly. So that kind of goes against a little bit of it there. Now, for charge number 2, they're coming up with 75% guilty. And what supports that probability is Jane's detailed testimony, claiming participating in freak offs or king nights was under emotional and financial conditions, that she just wanted a personal relationship with him, but this is how he coerced her to stay in the relationship, and that it wasn't necessarily anything that she wanted to do. Also with Cassie, with the release of the tapes, things like that, Jane actually saying she did it because he would withdraw his love and support. He would kick her out. He would leave her dry. He would just not have anything to do with her unless she did this, and that she loved him and wanted to stay with him. Described drug use being encouraged or coerced before all of these sessions, that it was almost required. Okay, much of the testimony of Cassie and Jane surrounded that they had to do this to get through it. Brendan Paul's inside information about procuring ecstasy, ketamine, and cocaine for Combs and the party guests. Multiple text messages between Combs and Brendan Paul about what to buy and what it was going to be used for, when the parties were, that they had to be there for certain time, clearly expliciting that it's for the people that are participating in these events, and himself. Verified code names, preparation, trying to do it underhandedly. Listen, if everything's above board, do you need to call stuff by code names? Do you need to have to actually be secretive? Do you have to tell people, don't tell them it's for me? Don't do this, don't do that. Do you actually have to arrange for somebody else to pick up your drugs if it's not illegal? If you don't want it put on you? Applying pressure to ensure that female guests were compliant and ready, by making sure they had whatever drugs they needed or wanted to get through it. Consistency across the witnesses between Cassie, Jane, and Mia, describing all of the similar progressions from grooming, control, threats, and repeated coercion into these sex events. Whether they said, okay, baby, or not, that's a big one for this charge. Jane noted that anytime you said no, there was a financial repercussion or emotional punishment by our private date is canceled. No dinner for you this week. Like, yeah, do another freak off, or I won't be spending the weekend. That kind of stuff. Cassie constantly being threatened with the release of the videos to embarrass her with her career, canceling anything that she had going in regards to her recording contract, getting beat before an interview so she can't go without everybody seeing it, the bruises, keeping her in a freak off for 36 hours before she was supposed to go to try out for some kind of an event, some kind of paid promotional event, so that she wasn't at her best. Like, this kind of manipulation, coercion, and pressure put on them. Definitely. There was also, several witnesses who described being recorded without consent. That's surveillance and emotional control and used for blackmail. Having those recordings later used as control mechanisms for the release, just to get things done the way Sean Combs wanted it. The weak points about these that the defense's cross has pointed out is that, of course, Jane emphasized her continued affection for him and occasionally would want to do something just to please him. The argument that this was voluntary kinky behavior is trying to cloud the coercion narrative, trying to cloud the illegal part of it. Basically, the defense coming forward and saying, it's just sex. You don't have to like how he does it, but he has a right to do it. What is it? I mean, I admit it's sex. It's lots of sex. But is it just sex? Could anybody actually look at any of that and say it's just sex? I don't think so. And down to the last charge, which has the least amount of guilt. And this is the one that I actually thought would have the most. And it's transportation to engage in prostitution. This is the Mann Act. Okay. And, they're saying it's only 70% probability. I think it's higher. I want to know what you guys think after. But basically, the financial logs presented by Homeland Security, dozens of travel records showing the women being flown, the women and organizing other prostitutes, okay, to sex party locations in Los Angeles, Miami, New York City, even the Caribbean, okay. Jane's testimony describing being told she had to travel for King's Nights or lose her rent. She was actually threatened. Detailing one Turks and Caicos trip where multiple men were hired for her without her consent, that she showed up and there was a whole bunch of guys there that she was supposed to have sex with. Expense reports showing consistent use of business funds for escort bookings, travel, and post-event damages, supporting a logistic chain. That to me proves it right there. They paid for the escort out of the business funds, okay, for these events in multiple cities and states around, and paid for their travel. They paid for the escort's travel in some cases. There is documentation through text messages in receipts in Cassie and two of the other men where they were taken to different locations. They were like, if they were from Los Angeles and they were flown to Miami or whatever, like they were actually taken to different locations to perform these. And that kind of proves that thing there, but it's all in how seriously the jury actually takes the evidence. The consistent use of business funds for these bookings, travel, and post-event damages, I mean, that's a logistical chain. That is actually concrete black and white evidence. I don't think the jury is going to be able to deny that. And even if they think the women may have participated willingly, what about the paid escorts? Isn't it about transportation to engage in prostitution? You're paying a prostitute to have a party and you're bringing them across gun. Like, yeah, I think so. Like, I don't see why it wouldn't be. But the weak points is that the government has to prove that the purpose of those travel was explicitly sex and it was involuntary. And so that could be why the percentage is lower, because it is going to be up to jury perception on how much they believe Cassie, Mia, and Jane in regards to having to travel, especially Cassie and Jane, which are the ones that are the prominent ones for this particular charge and for the sex trafficking charge, because the third victim that they had could not be found and would not come forward anymore, has withdrawn, and she won't have anything to do with it. And so without her, there's only the two, and you need two. So let's hope. Let's see if the jury is going to believe them. That could be why this one's a little bit lower. All right. The defense has argued that these women consent to the travel, that they willingly went to places and were actually just enjoying the perks of a loving relationship with Sean Combs, the travel, the money, the going to places. And they weren't compelled to engage in any type of prostitution whatsoever. But, well, it's up for speculation. So for racketeering conspiracy, we have an 80% chance. For the sex trafficking, for force, fraud, and coercion, 75. And for the transportation for prostitution, it drops down to 70. But Now, I'm really curious. What do you guys think? Racketrocity. Exactly. Exactly. It's more like black ops in the Marines or whatever. You mean like all of this stuff for the travel and everything? Was Diddler on the Epstein list? I don't know. I don't know, but lots of people went to Diddy parties. Now, just because you went to a white party or a party doesn't mean you had anything to do with freak offs. The one thing that this trial has clarified is that the big parties really weren't big, huge sex parties. Like, these freak offs were very controlled. There was only a few people in on them, and none of, like, there has been no video submitted into evidence of other celebrities involved in things like that. All of that salaciousness that everybody talked about before the actual evidence hit the court, that's not the case so far. It's a good question though, Grace, and I will have to do a little research on that. Just going to get into the AIs, and I'm going to get into that Epstein files and find out. But the Epstein files really don't have a lot of good information, to tell you the truth. But I can try to find out for you. I never thought of that. But at the point, what would it matter? The Epstein files are mostly about minors, are they not? In, like, and really what's been happening in this trial with P. Diddy is all about the women that he dated, and they are all above age. Although many, like Cassie and Jane, were young when they met him and did not have the sexual experience that he is exposing them to, which is part of the escalation of the coercion charges, and the grooming, actually bringing them into this lifestyle. It's not like they met and they were already, like, doing stuff like this, and P. Diddy just took advantage of the situation and said, just do it for me. That's not how it happened. It was kind of the opposite. Oh, you're just thinking, would they drop these charges for testimony in the Epstein files? Well, testimony against who? Epstein's dead, and his co-conspirator is already in jail. Like, who are they going to testify against? Right? The thing, listen, the Epstein issue is nothing but a PR issue now. There's nothing legal they can do. Epstein's dead. And the woman has already been charged and convicted. Who are they going to go after? All the people that took advantage of the services? They still need those two to prove the services were rendered, that the enterprise exists, before you can actually, say that anybody else was guilty of participating in it. You know what I mean, Grace? You know, does that make sense? Am I explaining that properly? It would be interesting to know, though. I do agree. It's a good question, because, like, it does add a little bit of context on how convoluted this whole sex trafficking thing is. You know, but I don't know. For Diddy, I guess, if he is in there, if he did have anything to do with it, then he's probably very pleased that the woman is already charged and Epstein is dead, because they ain't gonna do anything to him about it. And it would only make it look worse in his case. It would actually add an element for the jury to consider, because it is another high profile, very damaging case, But yeah. Okay, so you understand where I'm coming from, Grace. Like, I see what you mean, because it is very high profile, and of course, it is another very disgusting, case issue, very distasteful things that are happening, and but as far as legally, there's that case is going nowhere, like nowhere. So, all right. So on that, I'm almost at 2 hours, but damn, for a week that was supposed to be nothing, I sure had a lot to say. I guess I'm a little more well rested than I was last week. Thank you all for staying with me, though. If does anybody have any other questions, please feel free. Put it in the chat now while I'm wrapping up, and I'll try to address it. And for those of you listening later, like many of you do, please don't ever hesitate to put a question or a comment on the back of the video. I really enjoy the interaction. That's what I'm out here to do this for. It's the best part for me. So, yeah, let me hear from you. Questions, and I'll try to find you an answer if there's anything I can find in the documents or anything that I've talked about. If there's any misunderstanding in anything that I said or anything you want clarification on, I'm happy to address it, But each yeah, that's a good point there, Mippet. Each charge is over 70% predicted. Hell, I'm good with the assholes guilty. But I'm still worried a little bit. I'll be honest about it, Mippet. Recent trial events have made me really wonder about how juries actually look at things, and how we're looking at things very legally and very precise and like trying to match up to the charges. I'm wondering what they do, like sometimes, because they really could just disregard all the evidence if they want to. And I'm wondering if what type of evidence is actually going to sit with them well, that they're really going to, understand and go with. And also, we still have the defense case. What are they? That's going to be interesting next week. That's going to be a very interesting weekly update, because the defense is going to go all in. And one of the things that they're going to be putting out there is that all of these expenses and everything were normal, and that there's really nothing wrong with any of it. And I'm just trying to figure that out. They're also going to put toward the HR representative about complaints and how they really do have a process for everybody to register complaints, regardless of the stuff that the personal assistant said, that they can't go anywhere besides Christina Cormack or Sean Combs. They're going to put forward that they have a policy for employees to report this, that, or the other thing. But, having a policy on a shelf, a book on a shelf, doesn't mean that people use it. What defense? I don't know what they're going to. Well, the defense is that this is just his personal preference and it's not illegal. And that everybody involved in it did so willingly. And that just, that's what they do in entertainment. They pay for entertainment. So nothing illegal happened. And that maybe he has anger issues and he does drugs, but it doesn't make it RICO. That's what they're saying. Exactly, Mrs. Cassandra, what I was thinking. Yep. So thank you all for joining us. Hey, it was good to see, some of you new, coming around again is great. It's good to see the regulars here all the time. I really appreciate you guys joining me in the chat to help keep this going as I do these recaps. And we're going to get back on schedule until the next live trial that throws us off course again. Well, we shall see. But I'll be back next week. That's it for the weekend. I'm going to take tomorrow off. But I've got some more exciting things. I was actually thrown for a loop yesterday, rather excitedly in a way. One of the first cases I ever covered or went into great detail with on YouTube just became active again. It had been shelved for a while, but it is the murder of Suzanne Morphew. And Barry Morphew, her husband, was arrested yesterday again for the charges, and there's some new evidence. And I'll be talking to you guys. I think Monday I'll do a special on just that, to bring you up to date on all the evidence they have against him and what's been going on. But again, I always talk about the number 23, that I always have an active number of 23 cases. Well, we did go to verdict with Karen Reed on Wednesday, and so it dropped down. But it didn't stay there for very long, because in less than 48 hours, up popped Barry Morphew to fill the spot, to keep it as 23. Like, I think that's just where it's going to be, like, forever, as it goes, You mean the jury? Yeah, if they put themselves in the victim's shoes with the videos, yes. Yeah, if they know that they're drugged. They do say that in these videos that Cassie Ventura really does look drugged and not very in control. I think that will give a lot of weight to their decision. I think so too. Maybe it depends on their perception of those videos and what the actual mindset of Cassie Ventura was during the freak offs. I think that's going to be a big, big part of it. I love green olives, Mrs. Cassandra. That's funny because I have some sitting on my desk right now, too. Boy, great minds, right? All right. On that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you again, everybody. I hope to see you on Monday and Tuesday next week, and then more stuff towards the end of the week. I'll let you know how it's going to go. But we might just do a hang on the weekend. I don't know if anybody's interested in that. I would like everybody to come over and just do something chill. There's plenty of things to talk about in true crime, but I always want to do more than just that. Yeah. Ooh, stuffed with blue cheese. Ooh. I like the ones stuffed with blue cheese and the ones stuffed with roasted garlic. They're so good. Oh, now I have to go eat some, Mrs. Cassandra. Thank you very much. Now I got to go satisfy my craving again. All right, everybody. Have a great night. And I'll see you again really soon.